Hi, I'm Sean. Welcome to Secret Picture Factory. In this episode, we're going to learn how to turn your image into an Andy Warhol-inspired work of art. Warhol's style evolved throughout his career, though it almost always centered around silkscreening in one form or another. In this tutorial, we'll create a simple version of the Warhol style made famous through his pictures of Marilyn Monroe, Elvis Presley, and Chairman Mao. This tutorial is unique from some of the others you may have seen on the internet in that we're actually going to mimic the silkscreening process closely so that our result has a truly authentic feel to it. While this Warhol tutorial will be a simplified version, we'll do another one later that will take the style all the way to a museum-worthy reproduction that will include imperfections, misalignments, uneven ink spread, and damaged screens. Okay, let's begin. You'll probably be using a photograph of someone you know. In this case, I'm going to use a professionally taken photograph that I found on photodune.net and have rights permissions for. I do recommend the Photodune. It's terrific. They have a lot of good stuff on there, and the prices are reasonable. So let's begin. What we're going to start with first is we're going to crop this image so it's just of the woman in the foreground. And let's talk about resolution here briefly, in that you're going to want to start with something that's 8 by 10 inches at a resolution of 300. Now, that's pretty big, and if you have an older computer, it may choke a little bit. That's a lot of data, but it's important to start off with a size like that because if you want to turn it into a poster later, you're going to want all the resolution possible so that it makes a really nice poster that's very clear and not muddy at all. So I'm using Photoshop here. Photoshop has built-in rule of thirds in their crop tool, which is kind of nice. These are rule of thirds. I'm going to crop, and I'm actually going to push it slightly over outside of the canvas area here and crop. And what you'll see, I'm basically centering her face inside this square. I think it might go just a little bit larger on that. So we'll go right about there, let's say. We'll crop it. Now, you're going to see this area over here was actually where the canvas was, and I did not have my foreground and background color set to black and white, so it created a red background. That's no big deal. We'll go ahead and set that black and white right now, so we can fix that. We're actually going to get rid of all of this background entirely, and really the only part that we might have a problem with is down here in the shoulder area, and we can just do a quick clone if we want to make sure that's perfect, but otherwise this red's going to go away anyway. So the first thing that we want to do after our crop is we want to separate the foreground and the background. So the cool thing about this style is that the original work done by Andy Warhol was done with acetate and an X-Acto knife. And it was imperfect because he was doing it by hand. So that means we get to be a little sloppy, which is fun. You can cut out the shapes a couple different ways. I am going to, let's just use the marquee tool for this tutorial. The marquee tool, or the lasso tool, actually is right here, lasso tool. And there is a trick, if you don't already know it, that allows you to be a little more precise with this other than just freehanding it. If you're on a Macintosh, if you hold down the Option Command key, actually you have to set it first, click first, and then hold down the Option Command key, and it creates that kind of squarish looking marquee tool. And as long as you have the other two keys held down on the keyboard, you have flexibility, so it won't snap or shut or anything like that. So every time you want to set a place in there, just click, and we'll just go through, and we'll click here, and click here, and click here, and again, we're just going to do a really rough job of it. Because it is handmade. And at any time, if you want to have a line that's not perfectly straight, all you have to do is hold down the mouse button, the left one, and just keep it held down, and you can draw with it. Now, that's obviously going to be a little shakier unless you have a super steady hand. So we're just going to go around like this, like this, like this, like this. Again, you can be sloppy here. Around like so, like this, like that, like that, like that, like that, and then we'll just do like that. Okay, so now we have her head cut out, and we are going to invert this mat. There's a couple ways of doing this, or invert this, so we'll actually select the background instead of the foreground. There is a couple ways to do this. The way that I usually do it's usually pretty fast, is if you hold down, again, if you're on a Mac, if you hold down the Command, Shift, and I, that inverts the mat. So I don't know if you saw that, but the marching ants, I think is what they call them, will actually flip and you'll create your background, or it actually selects your background. So what you're going to want to do now is you're going to want to make sure, if you look over here, make sure white is your background color. And then we want to fill, we'll just paint over that background using Command and Delete, and that will fill it with a background color. So there you go. So now we have a nice clean white background. Now you'll see this area up here, we didn't quite get at the top of her head. That's okay, because we're going to do what's called crushing the image, and that will probably turn white anyway. So we want to keep that selection selected, because then we want to do something else before we move on. We want to create a new layer, and we do that just down here in the layer menu. And in layer 1, we want to do exactly what we did in the background. We want to fill it also. So we'll do Command Delete again, and you won't see it because it's still selected to white. But if you turn this off, if you turn the background off, you'll see that you now have a layer that looks like that. Now we want to invert back to the foreground like that, and we will create another layer. And now on this one, we're also going to fill with white, and we'll lose our image here temporarily, and that's okay. So now that we have both of those, let's deselect, and you can hit Command D or just click anywhere inside the image area and it'll go away. So let's turn these two layers off. Let's go ahead and label them so we don't get confused. So layer 1 was our background. Layer 2 was our, we'll call it head. Okay. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to turn the background image into what's called a halftone. Now, halftone is a printing process that is also was also used by Warhol in the silkscreening process. A silkscreen is nothing more than a really detailed stencil. That's all it truly is. So we are going to create that look specifically in Photoshop. So the first thing that we want to do is we're going to create the background, which will be the face, the detail in the face, and then the second phase will be applying color over the top of that. So first, for the background, we want to turn the image black and white. There's a number of ways to do this. Probably the easiest way is Command Shift, again if you're on a Mac, Command Shift U, and it desaturates it, and that basically drains all the color out. So now you're left with a black and white image. The next thing we want to do is, and this next thing that I'm about to say will actually vary depending on your photograph. Every photograph obviously is different. It was photographed under different lighting situations. There are different skin tones. So what you're going to want to do is really create the most attractive looking photograph that you can, and you might have to play around with this. But one of the easiest ways to sort of make sure the tones are fairly even across the board is to go to Image, Adjustments, and then at the bottom of this there's a feature called Equalize. Now it creates kind of like a flattened image, and you might even consider it a little ugly. And that's actually okay, because what we're trying to do is we want to get as much detail as we possibly can before we actually do the halftone. So once we have that, we will now go to Filter, Sketch, and Halftone Pattern. Okay, now obviously I was working with this before, so it jumped automatically to that. This might look like an old newspaper print to you. If that's the case, that's exactly the same process. This is the exact same process that that newspapers used. And given that Warhol started and was doing this in the 60s, he was using the tools of his time. So that makes a lot of sense that he would be using a halftone. So again, you're going to want to play around in here. I found the size 2 and contrast 50 is working pretty well for this photograph. Play around with it. It might be different for yours. Contrast, what you're looking for, while this looks more attractive probably in this case, we actually want to push it away from that. We want to push it towards a contrasty, more graphic looking image to stay in the style of Warhol. Now, as far as the size, that actually means the size of the dot. So as you turn it up, you lose detail. As you turn it down, you gain detail. But in this case, when you see we go all the way down to 1, it actually starts to get muddy. So I found for this particular picture, 2 seems to be pretty good. It'll also work well too for a poster. If people actually get right up on top of the poster, if you print it out, say 24 by 30 inches, which is about the size of a movie poster, they'll see really cool detail. It'll feel totally authentic. So let's agree to that, and there we go. And you'll see a moire patterning in Photoshop if you're not zoomed in to 100%. But if we zoom into 100%, we'll actually see it's maintaining its integrity. It looks good. So let's zoom back out so we can see the whole picture. And we're going to do something here. We want to beat up this halftone a little bit. It's a little too perfect. It looks like a computer created it. So one way of doing this is we are going to blur it. So you can just do blur, and I'm going to do it again. And so if you look at the dots, it actually softened them up a little bit. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to actually apply levels because we want to crush this image even more. If you look at the Marilyn Monroe picture from Warhol, or the Jackie O picture, or really any of them, you'll see they're really high contrast images. So we want to do that. So after we've blurred a couple of times, hit Command L, again if you're on a Mac, and your levels will come up. And your white levels are to the right. What you want to do is push them towards the middle and crush out that detail. So now it's almost completely washed out here. That's what we want. So if we zoom back out, see it's a lot more high contrast. That's good. We're getting closer. Now I like to blur it one more time just to soften the whole image a little bit. Again, it starts to feel more authentic when you do that because it's not computer perfect that way. So now we have a nice looking background image. So the next phase, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to apply color over the top of this. If you have any questions regarding this or any other video, feel free to post in the comments section and I'll see if I can clarify. Also, if you have an idea or a style that you've always wanted to know how to do, drop me a line and we'll see if we can't put together a tutorial and solve your creative riddle. If this tutorial has piqued your interest in Andy Warhol, the pop art movement, or modern art, click the link below to our blog and continue your investigation into one of the most culturally influential artists of the late 20th century.